Hi, welcome to Color Light Motion, curated and hosted by Victoria Vesna. I'm Bess Rocklitzer, president of the David Bermant Foundation. Congratulations, Victoria, on reaching the 30th episode. Such an exciting milestone. Today, we're pleased to present Paul Thomas, professor at UNSW, founder of the Transdisciplinary Imaging Conference, and a pioneer in transdisciplinary art practice. Please enjoy Paul Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Color Light Motion, our 30th episode. In this episode, Paul Thomas takes us from the tactile world of textiles that he initially studied into the invisible realms of nanotech, quantum theory, and chaos, revealing how ideas of pattern, duration, materiality, and most importantly, transformation continue to thread through his work in unexpected ways. From this talk in relation to the David Bermant collection, Paul chose to engage with the works of Thomas Wilfred and Takis, focusing on the notions of on and off, energy, and duration. These themes resonate throughout his ongoing investigations as an artist into nanotech, quantum theory, and chaos. We first met in 2001 when Paul invited us to participate in BEAP, Biennale of Electronic Art Perth, that he co-founded in Australia, where he is based. That was also where Zero at Wave Function premiered, and from that moment on, we discovered a shared fascination with the invisible nanorealms and the spaces in between science and imagination. A decade later, in 2012, we invited Paul to present his work at the UCLA Artside Gallery. And his project, Nano Essence, explored the threshold between life and death at the nanoscale, with Midas Touch investigating what transfers when skin comes into contact with gold, turning matter, touch, and transformation into artistic inquiry. Paul has authored and edited numerous influential books, including the most recent Concerning Quantum and Art and Nano Art, The Immateriality of Art. Alongside his academic and curatorial work, as an artist, he's also a prolific science fiction writer, known for his Quantum Detective series, which we have to investigate in another context. Most recently, we've been in close contact through his editorial leadership on an ambitious project, Encyclopedia of New Media Art, Artists in Practice, which I was privileged to be included in. He is also deeply dedicated as an educator, and for this reason, I invited him to lead a workshop for my biotech and art class, where he introduced students to the simple yet profound act of making marks with graphite, and the equally important idea of erasure. This is how he approached drawing. At the end of his talk, Paul is joined by an extraordinary group of respondents he invited. Bill Seaman, whose creative practice and research deeply engaged with quantum concepts for many years, Kurt Hanschlager, who's renowned for immersive performative installations across physical and virtual environments, and Andrea Rassel, filmmaker, media artist, and creative researcher working across art and science. We had a great audience, and we're joined also by Sean Cubitt, who co-edited Relive Media Art Histories with Paul and was part of this very rich exchange. I'm sure you'll enjoy this episode.
Well, I want to thank Victoria for inviting me and the David Bermant Foundation to speak. It's a pleasure and a privilege to do it. And I want to start this talk with just a brief insight into some of my early work on arriving in Australia in 1977. is to give a context of my ongoing obsession, maybe, as Victoria might have said, interest in space and duration, and where that interest led me and how I got there, and my relationship to the two artists that I've chosen to discuss this with, um, um, to talk about. Okay, so let's begin. So I put this slide in because it was an early work in called 1 to 10, and it was just me walking in front of a blackboard, and but what I wrote about it in a little document that was made and was mailed out to everywhere I could at that time, because there was no point in doing it in Perth, where I actually am not at the moment. I'm in Sydney, but the thing was to try and get the research that I was doing just out there as a sort of small publication. But what I was doing here was trying to walk through space, almost in a kind of form of outlining myself, experiencing the emotion. In other words, trying to start to see that if I could be visualizing the traces of the feelings of the person as they move through space, a kind of emotional after effects. I was really interested in how we transmit, become bigger, our presence becomes bigger. And so these are like glimpses into something that, for me, become almost a sketchbook or a signpost of where I was actually going and maybe heading to. So on the left of frame is a thing called Glimpses, and it's very much an early, Sony Portapack TV, me trying to touch the boundaries of where, like I am doing now, where the screen is, so where my presence is in a kind of space, and with me looking at the monitor as I'm videoing myself. And then I wrote at the bottom of it, it seems I seem only to glimpse at the possibilities. Then it breaks down until the next journey allows another glimpse. So, and this becomes relevant to me later on the right. I've got a tape measure and I'm trying to measure Perth. And below that is a drawing of the sound work that I did. And below that is the sort of text that went with the sound poem. And so I'm trying to draw that in the empty space, the sound, because stereo would come out then, and you'd ping the thing from one speaker to the other, and it's sort of like you could hear the voice going across the space. And this is from a fairly maybe naive background, in a sense of maybe I ran away from the UK in 77 because maybe I felt a little undereducated in what I wanted to do because of my dyslexia. I wasn't very well read, and I seem to have this idea that people that who were well read were, like something to be wary of. And so getting to Australia, I wanted to try and do these things, and it was an interesting set of experiments to try and test myself out. My initial original degree was textiles, and I felt sometimes a bit inhibited by that, although it was a wonderful degree to do. It also made me feel, again, undereducated in relationship to a kind of history. So these people, Eton Jules Marais, a scientist and a psychologist and chronophotographer, became part of a fascination I had with how to depict the invisibleness of movement, and how they relate to Henry Bergson and Bergson's theory of duration. So my talk is about duration in this context as well. So, and these notions of duration of Bergson's, where you can't depict instances, like things like film. When film plays, they're just a series of instances that get put together, and we see a semblance of reality that's not really reality. They're stills just put together. And Bergson kind of explains this through in a relationship to some extent with Zeno's arrow paradox and other paradoxes that Zeno of Elea in the 5th century BCE actually posited that if you measured an arrow flying through space, then the arrow would have to be still, and therefore it didn't describe anything of motion. And so here we have this photograph that Mare did against a black velvet background of somebody jumping over, where he's painted white lines on the person and done a flicker in front of had a machine to flicker in front of the camera that was left on B at that time, left open, the lens, and you would then see this sort of motion of the person in this kind of blur, but the lines would highlight then this sort of intermediate machine gun type of thing of the movement. And that was another. And this went on, like with my favorite when I was a student going to the Tate, there was one work that I loved, which was the next slide. But the idea that who can still believe in the opacity of bodies since our sharpened and multiplied sensitivities have already penetrated the obscure manifestations of the medium? Why should we forget in our creation the double power of our sight, capable of giving results analogous to those of X-rays? So in 1910, that was part of his manifesto. And he said in the manifesto of 1913, any division of matter into independent bodies with determined outlines is artificial. And you think, that's incredible, this sort of effect of that on me in relationship to the fact that I found these things out after I was doing those kind of works. They were part of my research as it grew, as my interest grew, and I wanted to find out more. So, and in fact, of course, nothing is of rest, is itself an abstraction. Only changing states exist, and matter itself, envisaged as an indivisible whole, must be a flux rather than a thing. And that again, that notion of the flux of life, the flux at an atomic level, let's say. And what we get from this is from Boccioni too, life is constantly changing. Instead of breaking up reality into individual natural elements, we want to render life as matter, revealing in its equality as movement. So they were saying that almost still matter was also moving. And you see the sculpture that I would go and visit at the Tate, and I didn't know why I loved it, but I knew I loved it, and I would go and see it just because, not necessarily look at everything else, but just this, because this was it. This filled me up, if you know what I mean. It was like too much to maybe deal with, the fact that I was so excited about it. And it's reoccurred. So we have Mare, we have Bergson, and we have Boccioni. And we have Bergson at that moment in time that was creating this kind of concept of duration, and that Boccioni knew about him and was referencing him. And now I'm just going to go on to Mare. And the interesting thing about the sort of relationship to Mare and the measurement comes out in the fact that Louis de Broglie, who was a physicist who developed the wave function, particle wave function, particle wave function. Yeah, I'll get it right. De Broglie himself noted that Bergson's philosophical insights on movement and time duration anticipated key concepts of quantum mechanics by roughly 40 years. So he's positing that what Mare was doing and what Bergson was doing and what maybe Boccioni was doing was preempting quantum mechanics by these things. And this is one of Mare's works of 51 jets of steam, smoke coming down and he wants to explore the passage of air. But he did this in this machine, and in 1901. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a scientific experiment that has its own aesthetic. So the smoke machine started to create these visual effects. And that led me on, of course, to a relationship with Thomas Wilfred, where you can see the connection in a minute. But I just want to stop at I love the concept of the unexplored sensation. I mean, an unexplored sensation. I mean, I wish I could have a poster like that, an achievement that will rank among man's greatest. It's beautiful to have that much positivity around this. But what I'm suggesting here is that Thomas Wilfred's work has a similar relationship to the objective that Mare had. But it's also, this beautiful translucent aesthetic that you see in this work. And that's partly what I think attracted me to it, because in my background of textiles and so on, using translucent materials in the same time that Rauschenberg was doing his large textile works was, again, through this translucent material, was quite beautiful. And this seemed to throw me back to that. And also the technology about it, and the time. There was a thing, they were saying that the duration of the work, in the work that he made, because he made different works, was from 5 minutes, 15 seconds to approximately 9 years, 127 days and 8 hours, which I thought is so perfect about duration, where a work of art has that sort of time frame to, like you get a cinema and you say the film is going to last for 9 years, 127 days and 8 hours. It's like shifts the whole concept of what a work of art or duration is in that context. And so I managed to grab a little bit with this screen from that doesn't want to play. Oh, well, never mind. You've got it from that source. Oh, there it goes. So this is just a very short excerpt just to give you an idea about what that kind of duration and the maybe technologies of this, using light, color, glass, so on, to rotate around and give this eerie and never-ending, where Mare's was scientific presentation to understand how air went. And so it was a more objectified experiment, where this is an artwork, intentionally an artwork, that gives you an aesthetic of a similar thing. So you learn about the relationship between art and science, about this possibility. And I became interested in this work by Takis, which is part of the Foundation's collection. And this was again starting to be, like these are two flashing lights that come on and give us a feeling that they're connected but not connected. So they're very much a kind of irregular, appear to be irregular flashing, as though they're sending out some sort of code that you can't understand. And they seem to have this kind of on-off relationship, where you have a third, or a possibility, some other kind of possibility of what their actually intention is. And their intention is, to some extent, chaotic. So they don't form a understandable, like they're like Morse code, but the Morse code that you really can't understand in the end. It doesn't make sense, but the potential is that it does have some idea about critiquing technology and meaning through technology. And there's another still. So I think that that these things are relevant to looking back at and to starting to say how they actually fit together with other things that were happening at the time. So this is 1968 or 58, 60. So this is like after there was trying to determine whether quantum mechanics was actually true or not. And because from 1927, when Heisenberg did the uncertainty principle, it took until Bell in 1963 to do the thought experiment, which said if you could prove reality in the act of happening, then you could say that quantum mechanics is not true, but you can't capture reality in the act of happening. So therefore, quantum mechanics to some extent is true. So that's not necessarily, but just gives you an idea of the kind of Bell's theorem. A very dumbed down one, most probably. But that's the sort of thing that I started to look at in relationship to this work. This kind of connection with the signal and this kind of connection with on-off, and then with quantum mechanics and so on, and the quantum computing, you get the on-off, but you also get on and off. So you get 4 binary kind of states, where you get this notion of challenging this binary state of on and off. And I've got again a piece of video of that, just from the website, just to show this intermittent signal that's being done. And there was lots of interesting things said about about the work, and about how he almost seemed to tinker with electricity as a kind of stream, and so on, and electromagnetism. So it became, again, this thing where science and art are kind of putting together to create this different manifestation of things. And it made me think of the sort of work of Martin Creed, who won the Turner Prize for his on-off work. And so we had this kind of interesting thing of just light on, light off. Again, a very binary kind of relationship, which is very focused on the opposite of chaos. But to some extent, when lights go off, there is a kind of notion of a seminal chaos. So this is why I wanted to bring these out into the sort of relationship of the practice. And to take you into my work, I've got a little 2-minute segue. Or a minute segue.
You've heard how people use only 10% of their brains. Sorcerers can manipulate matter because they're born with the capability to use the entire power of their brains, which also explains why molecular physics comes so easily to you.
So wait, is sorcery science or magic?
Yes and yes. For now, all you need is a basic combat spell, making fire. What causes molecules to heat up?
They vibrate?
Everything we see is in a constant state of vibration, thus the illusion of solidity. But how do we take that which appears solid and have it burst into flames? We will the vibrations to go faster. Step 1, clear your mind. Step 2, see the molecules. Step 3, make them shake.
Oh!
Got it?
No, I definitely don't got it.
Trust the ring, Dave. And keep it subtle. Civilian.
So I'm asking you to trust this fun. I hope you enjoyed the movie. I didn't get any indication that you weren't getting a sound, so I presume you were. So I want to talk about my practice in relationship to all the things that we've just been talking about duration, quantum. So I went from a nano body of work, which Victoria mentioned, the Midas, like how much of us become part of the world around us. So when we touch, how much of us become part of what we touch, and relationship brought me down to growing skin cells and using an atomic force microscope to try and discover how much of us became. And of course, never having done anything with that scale, I was, like an amateur walking around without necessarily knowing how big or how small things were. When I show you what a dot of graphite, when you put a pencil mark and a dot of graphite and you ask how many atoms are in that dot of graphite, then it's 10 to the power of 13. Then you start to go, oh my God, that many in that little dot. And each one of them can have a slither of graphene in it. And graphene is the material of one sheet of atoms then it's supposed to be 20 times stronger than steel. It's supposed to be the wonder material that's going to transform our devices, like the screen of your mobile phone. But that got me interested in relationship between life and death, which I also showed at UCLA with nanoessence, about where does life exist, and and can you look at a nanoscale? So to start to think below that cellular level about the possibility of life below that level. And I became fascinated with that kind of exploration of things like that. So I grew some Hackett cells, which were immortal cells, and then I transferred them, and then I to the atomic force microscope in vitro, scanned them, and started to explore life and death at that level. And that led me on to thinking about quantum consciousness. So that's a very brief. You can find all these works on my website, by the way, in case you're interested. But this is a quantum computer. On the left it's when it's covered up, and on the right when it's naked. And right at the bottom of the gold is where the cantilever, where the receiver, where the actual electron is used to work as a qubit. It's in this chamber, which is a hugely strong magnetic field, and it's at sub-zero temperatures. And so what they want to do is to get an electron and hold it in a position. And so I was looking at this at UNSW, where they have the technology to make this kind of quantum computing, and what they use is silicon and phosphorus. So it means that when they put the two together, it leaves one free electron to be able to be utilized in this machine to be able to create a spin. So this is like a spin between north and south. But the interesting thing is that it has a superposition, which we all know, and that superposition can give us two other measurements: on, off, off, on, off. So we're looking at this, and so this is a drawing of an electron, which is obviously not an electron because it's not a ball and it doesn't spin. So we have all these metaphors for the atomic world as being these little atoms that fly around and stuff like that, but they're not, and they're not spinning. They have an angular momentum, but they're not spinning. So what they want to do in the quantum computer is to freeze the electron, a microwave signal, and they want to then get that to spin, and they want it to spin between north and south. So they hit it with a microwave signal, and that microwave signal then gets them to do this calculation where they suggest where it's going to be between north and south when they hit it with the microwave. So this is a microwave signal, and it's showing you where in real time when the electron spins. And now I wasn't very interested in that, but I was interested in the phosphorus and the materials that we have in our brain. And I started to think about that in relationship to thinking about how we could possibly have a quantum computer in our brain. So it was, so I decided to try and do this work where I changed the microwave signal, affected the microwave signal by having my voice read to the electron, to try and change its path to some
We
extent.
had the same troubles with the probability in classical physics, and therefore the problem is, how can we stimulate the quantum mechanics? There are two ways that we can go about it. We can give up our rule about what the computer was. We can say, let the computer itself be of quantum mechanical elements, which obey quantum mechanical laws.
So you can see in that I'm trying to get this. There's two streams. One stream is the natural stream, and the other stream, I think it's the blue,
We
is
had
my
the same
voice.
troubles with the probability in classical physics.
So you can see my voice is affecting the movement of where the electron would be in between north in this block steer, between north and south. And so what they're doing is they're creating a series of experiments that would then be reduced to one number, which is where they would believe the location would be between on and off, between north and south. So they're looking for these numbers that would be just probabilistic to create the other information about the binary, where they get their four numbers from. And of course, when these are entangled together, then they would start to create more. But we have phosphorus in our brain, and so you start to think, well, what could that mean if we could use certain things like when we're sort of calling about quantum tunneling, and we think, oh, quantum tunneling, it means it can just go through things that seem to be solid and still maintain its own energy. In other words, it happens really fast and it goes through rather than over, which going over takes energy, going through doesn't. So they keep their same energy level. And that means I'm thinking, well, I wonder if intuition is a series of neurons all connecting together at one time in the same way that they're talking about here. Because you have 86 trillion neurons in your brain. And I'm going, well, I mean, what are they all doing when you're only getting a light from one of them? Say, oh, activity is happening here, but you've got 86 trillion of them. You're thinking, and they're got like each one's got about 100 billion atoms in them. So it just seems such a world of probabilities and possibilities, and that maybe we have that as our capability.
We had the same trouble.
So this got transferred into a work again, and you saw that. And this is the idea that you're looking at here, is that this is where the firing comes. So the data that from that firing gets put into the Unity and creates a 3D model. And then there's a series of random photographs that I've taken, and it takes some of these photographs and does like a little bloom where they're firing. And that gives you an idea of the sort of three-dimensionality of it. And of course, this is being directed through sounds through the speakers of my voice. And it gives you a kind of feeling of like the potential of being inside a thinking or a series of thoughts that are happening, but you only get like just the smallest amount of information. And these always get put together. And so, you know, like when you're thinking, and when you're in a sort of conscious state of just allowing your thoughts to run free, and somebody runs up to you and says, oh, what are you thinking about? Well, I mean, obviously it's a friend or something, not just a stranger in the street, runs up to you and says, what are you thinking about? You have to collapse your thinking, like a quantum collapse. And you then can only give, let's say, one thought, and it's usually maybe not a very good expression of what you're actually thinking. It's just very difficult to maybe find the right words to actually express something that you're actually just sensing. And it's this that becomes interesting. This then gets, the work got put into a kind of a dome-like, where the data has been transferred into sound, and this would then play in a dome. So you could actually get almost half inside this thinking process.
We had the same.
Sorry about that. Okay, I was writing a book called Quantum Art and Uncertainty at the same time, and I was referencing a number of artists that had visualized this invisible, ineffable area. And it made me start to think, I wonder if I could paint it. You know, if I, rather than just write about it and not do anything, whether if I could make some paintings that reflected a kind of feeling of this layering of data. And so I started with this series of paintings, which were abstractions, and then on top of the abstraction was a translucent. To some extent, thinking about it now, it's very much like Rauschenberg, like when he did his solvent transfers, where I transferred the photocopy of the studio, where you can see in the right-hand one that tube and the stripes of the machinery, the aluminium that holds it up, and puts that on top of an abstraction. So it's the next layer. So it's like the abstract painting, the layer of the studio where the physicists work as opposed to the artist studio, and then this sort of wash over the top where you're dragging paint across backwards and forwards to try and, I suppose, give that sense of this sort of continual motion, this continual flux that we talked about right at the beginning. And that led me on to chaos and a work that starts to explore the notion of chaos. I like chaos because it has this idea of a kind of space between the classical world and the quantum world. And in the quantum world, we have these, crazy kind of laws that are different to a classical world laws. And then how do we then express that difference? How do artists internalize this information that could be true or could not be true, but how do we express it? Like, how do you express an emotion? How do you generate, like the poster said from Thomas Winfield, that it was a sensation. So how do you create the sensation that expresses something like this? But just to give you an idea about what quantum chaos actually is, so I've got a glass of water and you get ink and you drop the ink into the water. And so I'm trying to say that this is not a work of art. This is just dropping ink into water. So the intention for it is different than the intention of making a work of art. But what you find is that the things bifurcate. In other words, everything starts to spread out. It gets smaller and smaller. And that's what happens in a kind of, when things bifurcate and reduce in scale, it gets to the point where it reaches Heisenberg. And Heisenberg's there going, wait a minute, stop what you're doing. You can't come down here with your classical chaos. You really need to shift it because it's going to come quantum chaos. And the idea that there's a kind of liminal space between the two becomes an interesting idea for me. And so to explain how it happens and how it works with quantum computing, because this is what they want to use in quantum computing, which does seem like very bizarre, but it just adds to the bizarreness of it, is you get a spinning top, a classical spinning top, but when it starts to get slower, it starts to do erratic movements. So it's not just straight up. spinning fast, it's starting to gyrate in different ways. And if you thought that the top of it was like a tip inside a ball, it would be pointing all around in different directions as it started to lose its stability. And that's the kind of thing that happens. Here is a phase plot from a classical kick top, which is the spinning top. And what they do is they're suggesting that where the blue is, of course, is where the chaos happens, and where the brown is where it's much more upright and solid. So they're suggesting that if you can, in the frozen state of the electron, turn it towards the center of chaos, you can put it in to a chaotic momentum, and the signature of quantum chaos is that it automatically entangles with the electrons next to it. So you get this automatic, so if you're trying to bombard a whole number of electrons to try and get them to turn, and they're not entangled, you're going to lose some of that information. But quantum chaos, it's suggested, can give you that information. And so here we go. So you get this sort of, and this is a diagram that the scientists use, you know, like to show this projection of chaos, where the hammer projection is where they believe the light marks are where the energy would be, and therefore they can move it. So we took the information that they had here, and I started to look at the notion of felt. So the image at the top left is an image of wool and felt that fits in with sort of Deleuze and Guattari's notion of a smooth space as opposed to striated space, where weaving would be a striated space, and this is a chaotic space where the fibers hold together. There's no structure except as you pat them together with soap, then they become a fiber and a piece of cloth. And they're only held together by their own, by the patting together of them, where they get some relationship which forms gives it a tensile strength. This was run through, which you can see just below there, a algorithm that a sorting algorithm, which was sorting all of them to the speculative data that you saw projecting where the classical chaos would be. I mean, where the quantum chaos would be in the previous diagram. Very hard to know whether you're understanding this or not see its names, but I'll carry on. And so you get this notion that each line of pixels, so what it does is it takes the color of the pixels, which is a hexadecimal number, and does the corresponding number for the quantum chaos data, and then it sorts them all into that configuration. And so you get this process of where it changes from one to the other, and I'll show you one in a minute. But again, I tried to also paint it as a series of paintings where I used a kind of squeegee and painted the surface again, and then squeegeed it down, then sanded it back, then painted it again and squeegeed it, and then sanded it back. And so you started to get this, almost trying to get the same kind of liminal space happening that I was talking about before. And there's two more smaller versions. And there's a kind of large version of the same thing happening. So I see this as that artists trying to work in this area, trying to give a kind of gift. And so I talk about people who tried historically to express things and explain things that you can't see. And so I think that art at the moment, and especially in the area of AI, is giving gifts. It's giving gifts of a different way of looking at the world, apart from a technologized view of the world, or an objective, quantifiable view of the world from science. I mean, there's lots of things that I'd like to talk to you about in relationship to this, and the Klineman and the Lucretius and the swerve of the atom, and whether the whole universe is really a mistake because two atoms unpredictably collided together and formed everything, as Lucretius stated. But this is a section where I've multiplied it to give this notion of a pattern of these things taking place. I don't know if you can see it okay. I tried to find a smaller file, but they're pretty big files that would play through Zoom, but you might get the effect. And this led me in a circle to some extent, quantum chaos, to this notion of glimpses, which is a series of drawings that I've done. But what I'm trying to do is capture the duration of a movie and to see it according to Boltzmann as this notion that when we're looking at something, we don't actually see the thing. What we are actually seeing is a blur of its potential. So when you're looking at the screen, you're seeing this, but you're seeing so many other things as well, and you are so many other things, and it's like a huge chaotic mess, let's say, of information, but our perception only draws it down to this one thing, but everything else is going on. And so you wanted to try and draw that where every mark I made was a mark about the movie that was forever changing. You didn't freeze it, you just drew from start to finish. And so this movie was it was two movies together. It was Space Odyssey and The Fifth Element. At the time, it was very much like trying to just draw this thing and try to erase where, like when most you should know or do know, when you're drawing, you sometimes draw something and you like what you've drawn, and suddenly the power shifts where you're not really drawing anymore. You kind of, this little bit that you've drawn owns you and controls you. And I did a quantum drawing workshop with Victoria where we talked about this in the sense of drawing, that when you make a mark, like when you ask somebody about their thought, you collapse the world, you collapse things down. And so before you make that mark, you're summing up all the possibilities of what you could say with this mark, like position, proportions, light, so on, gravity, and so you're summing all these, and when you make it, you collapse it just down to one point, and then you'll come back in this sort of like delayed choice quantum erasure type of way to make your second mark. And it's this one mark and a second mark, and the massive information that you're dealing with all the time to try and sum up the potential of the relevance of the first mark to the second mark. So I'm trying to, when I start to like something, I was trying to erase it. And this erasure got more, of getting rid of some of the marks that I was making that I didn't like, because I liked them. And it was like when I got something uncomfortable, it was maybe better than when I got something that, and so this sort of notion of Boltzmann's blur and stuff became exciting for me. But it took me back to those drawings. I didn't even know when I did it, but when I did these drawings, and then I found Carlo Rovelli's book, The Origins of Time, and in this time he's talking about Boltzmann and the blur and stuff like that, which led me to thinking about this and led me back to the very first start where I wrote about a glimpse of reality. And I'm going, oh my God, my whole life, I'm like, about 50 years ago or 40 years ago, I did this, and I said that, and now it's still there with me. It's still like part of that path. It's part of that journey. It's something that I'm still obsessing about. And that took me to another drawing, and then I've just been working. This is a Fallout, the series on TV. This is episode 1 and a bit of Fallout. And I wanted to try and see if I could take it further with technology to put it back into a kind of technological binary, and I did. Uh, I think I've frozen the key note. So maybe that. And
You want to restart, maybe?
it's the last slide, so I'll just put it up.
It's really interesting that it's the last slide. It's got a mind of its own.
It's gone. It's working, I think.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
So this is a drawing. Put in that drawing that you saw, put into Photoshop, and then doing the contour edges. So that what you're seeing is the white lines, is the lines around the marks, which every mark is related to a temporal process, a duration. So every mark is a different mark within the film structure, even though the film is only a semblance of reality because it's still stills that are joined together into this process. So I was just interested in how that became transformed into this type of almost sense of depth, almost liminal space within this accretion of marks that happen. And then I was going to go like that, and that would have been it, Victoria.
Thank you so much. It was really mesmerizing to watch. I'm always amazed how we see each other's work, we talk, but it's always nice to put it in context and have some kind of length to it and a thread. Wonderful and really thought-provoking. So I'll pass it on to whoever wants to start first.
Thanks, Paul. I'll jump in first. That was wonderful and a great follow-up to seeing your book launch recently too. I am really fascinated in the way that we perceive time through different types of artwork. And I'm a filmmaker by training, and Paul comes more from a visual arts background. And I think one of the things that interested me when we were both working with the atomic force microscope was, I think it was in relation to nanoessence, was Paul's instinct as a visual artist to layer these images on top of one another and provide a virtual sort of fly-through experience. Whereas my intention, my immediate instinct was to put these images along a timeline. And I think that came from virtue of my background as a filmmaker and being accustomed to that sort of space. And then as I sort of went down this rabbit hole, sort of following Paul, he's been a great mentor to me over the years, is I started to think about the moving image and the relationship of our perception of time within the moving image versus the way we perceive these complicated dynamics of the nano and quantum scale. And one of the things that I think is a really important cultural context to hold is that the notion of frames as representative of instants has huge cultural effects. And when we start to do imaging at the nanoscale and below, they're often scanning rather than captures. So one frame is no longer representative of a moment. So in the case of the atomic force microscope, I'm not sure how long Paul's frames were, but mine were certainly over 5 minutes. So there was a complicated relationship to time, even within that first image, let alone the longer sort of filmmaking durational experience of the work as a film. which were quite short films because it took like 3 days to capture 8 seconds of footage when you're working in that way. But I think that, yeah, the reverberance of that in terms of how we perceive time and how we relate to nanoscale and quantum phenomena is really important. And I think that that is one of the biggest impacts that we have as artists working in this space, is to shift this kind of temporal literacy of these phenomena, because we're asking people to set aside a more common understanding of the instantaneity of time in relation to frames. And I think, what you were saying, Paul, about the frame in your works becoming a collapse and a blur, that made me think of the mathematician Herman Weyl, who what you call the blur, he would have called the halo. So for him, the notion of the field and energetics is very intertwined with time and temporal perception. So if we have an electron, for example, and it has an impact on its neighboring field, then for Weyl, there was no now, and there was no exact or abrupt earlier, and there was no exact or abrupt later. He was talking about this halo which faded into the past quickly in the case of electrons, and quickly into the future. And so I love the idea of the blur or the halo as being something which is captured within one of your images, Paul. I think that's really beautiful.
Thanks. I think that there's an interesting notion of, I hate the word interesting now. I think it's like got onto the same level as like this. But I think that we add time. So what we're doing now, all of us here, is having an event, and time for everybody is different. But we bring it in as a variable of our lives. If we didn't, then we could maybe exist without time like that. But we exist in this variable, and I that for me is, so everything we do is a kind of event, and this event has a multifaceted event, and time is one of the elements of a multifaceted event. And when things happen quickly and time's flying by and so on and so forth, it's us that gives importance to time, not time itself. And it's the same with I've been thinking a lot about the Big Bang and consciousness being part of the Big Bang as an element of it, as a constituent of the Big Bang, and all that, what that would mean if that was actually true, which I don't care if it is true or isn't. I just think it's exciting to think about. I mean, and that's what you're given, is that. And then I think of the atoms gathering together, and why atoms gather together like that at that scale. And it's to do with attraction. And so we're built up of all these elements that are attracted together and cooperating with one another at an atomic scale. And then I start to think of what's the ethics involved in how we treat atoms, and whether we need an ethics for an electron, an actual responsibility that we have, where we set up a thing like they're trying to do with AI, but for the atomic world, And so I think that there's so much going on now in my head that I wish it wasn't, but it's fascinating things that are happening. So this event, the cooperation of a family of atoms together, coexisting, and then they provide the molecules, they provide the second mass, and then they provide tissue and cells, and then cells become tissue, and you gradually get up, but it's all consisting of this swarm of swarms, if you see what I mean. Anyway, that was great. Thanks for saying that, Andrea. I think there's lots to think about, and 20 minutes I think was a rough scans time. The nanoessence, each one, it took nearly 20 minutes to scan that, each slide.
Amazing. Hey, Bill.
Yeah, I wondered, your images are incredibly beautiful and moving, and I'm wondering if there are images by physicists that you find equally moving, and how would you compare and contrast the kinds of images that physicists present to the world compared to what artists do.
Yeah. I think that was what I was trying to do with the first slides with Mare's smoke machine and with Thomas, to say that there's an intentionality, although there was 30 years between them, there's a kind of intentionality going on there where I'm intentionally making art and I don't have to stand by the same rules. Where when you're a scientist and you make and the engineer or the so-and-so gives you a machine that produces a beautiful image and you recognize the beauty of their image, there is something integral that's missing. And it's not just, it's like a reflection rather than a deconstruction of everything that you're thinking of going into that. It's like an outcome, and it's a quantifiable outcome. And I was listening to Ravelli talk on a podcast, and he was keeping going, like he wanted to talk philosophically, but he kept on mentioning the reference point and then the point, perspectival point. And they're talking about, we can have all this discussion, but I still need to come down to a point to measure from. And it's that measurement that corrupts everything and gives us something that, because, like anybody that can come up with an imaginary number to make mathematics work, I mean, is a kind of hero to me because I couldn't do maths at all at school. I mean, like when they turned maths into language, when they said it takes 6 men to dig a tunnel with 3 spades and, how long does it, that just blew me. I couldn't understand why they were digging and I couldn't understand anything to do with what they were saying. So I find that's, so I think there's a different world there and a different intentionality. And when your intention is to make art, then it falls into something different. That doesn't mean to say I'm in any way critical or something of them showing the work. I just don't, in my mind, it's got nothing to do with art in that context. I'm talking about artists like yourself that are, and like Kurt and Andrea, that are radical experimentalists. They make experiments. They make things that they're trying to give you a different view than art about things. They're trying to set a different set of questions. So I think that I was trying to get that across right at the beginning, that there is a difference between art and science, and and scientists as artists are, it's interesting because they come with preconceptions usually, and it's hard to get rid of preconceptions. It's hard for an artist to get rid of their own preconceptions, like their own taste, to expand upon their taste. Yeah, but it's good. It's an interesting area, Bill, and we talk about this a lot, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
So.
But what about collaborating with the scientists, working tete-a-tete and really together addressing something that requires both to kind of scratch their heads and one?
I mean, I thought a lot about this because I realized it happens, but it never really happened for me. You know what I mean? Like there's things that are said that I like. But when it comes to this notion of a shared aesthetic, I find very difficult to, because I'm a control person. I like to be in control of my aesthetic. I don't like, it to be a negotiation, and I don't think it can be a negotiation. I mean, I think one person makes up their mind, and I think, like I would think that you can collaborate in the sense of discussing things with them, but in the making of an art, you have to be responsible for the artwork. You have to be responsible for your your gift. It's like, this is not a group gift. This is my gift to you. And I think art gives gifts.
I think
there is a collaboration. No? There is a collaboration because you're aware of the science. Clearly, you're aware of it, and you are researching. And I mean, what made the talk so intriguing to me is that there's a full understanding and actually passion for that, right, in you. But then when it comes to the artwork that comes out of it, it's like it goes to the background I mean, like visually, really, anyway. And it reminded me a lot of what you showed. But I mean, incidentally, yesterday I went to MoMA here in New York and saw the Duchamp retrospective, right? And so what was striking, I mean, everybody knows everything about Duchamp. What is striking every time again to see the versatility and the breadth of his work in that many different ways. So I think it was very much, from what I know about him, it's a similar mindset, right? You're very interested in the world. You're very interested in how all of this comes together, based on science. But I wanted to bring one aspect to the whole thing, which connects with the art. And I think like this aspect of emotion, right? Of what connects a little bit to vibration and electrons vibing, atoms vibing. Because what I love about your work, Paul, is that it focuses in the end on the human condition, of course, and on the poetry of art making, and the works are extremely poetic, I find, spatial. And so there's a lot of emotion in there. I find them emotional spaces, truly. And that is strangely often overlooked. I think that this emotion as a change and chaos sort of agent, really, right? That's one thing. So there's the rational us, which is also like, and that's of course like a too simplistic, like science. And then there is, the irrational part is like the rest of us, and where art also connects to, which I don't think there's this clear separation, but there's like by tendency. So
yeah, no, I think you're right, but I think collaboration. But I think that's what, this invisible emotion that you feel that you want to express is a sort of sum total of a lot of what goes on in you and your experience. And it doesn't kind of, I mean, I thought when I retired, like I'd go into this sort of thing of, now I can give all that up and carry on, and do something else like rest and stuff. But nothing happened, nothing changed. The intensity even got worse, like, and the emotion and the inability to express things. Oh my God, it's so complex. And so I do think about all these things about collaborations and so on. I just think that in the end, like, you're the one that gets paid the big bucks, right? So I want your voice. You know what I mean? I want to pay for that voice. And it's not sometimes like a music where you're paying for that kind of collaboration or something. It's a different, visualizing something is sound is kind of this sort of ephemeral abstraction, but getting something visual, this is what I see as being the world. I mean, that's tough. And I don't make a lot of art sometimes just because it's too hard. Writing for a dyslexic is hard, but making art is much harder.
So I have a question about exactly that. How do you separate visual from sound? If you're reducing everything to vibrations, which you are, then how is the visual separate from art, from sound?
Yeah. To some extent, it's not, and nearly all my work has sound with it. Although I didn't, like my Quantum Chaos has 44 minutes of sound art with it, which is like a nightmare. But You know, because whenever I made sound art, you know, I used to be so embarrassed about it. I would never play it to anybody because it sounded so awful. It's like my own voice. You know, I hate my voice. You know, when I hear it, I go, "Oh my
For
God, that's just the
everybody,
worst voice."
actually, there's something about the brain hearing their own
Yeah,
voice.
yeah,
Uh,
it's horrible.
it's
So
interesting.
I don't know. And so your question, what was your question?
Well,
So I went off on a tangent.
you were separating sound from visuals, but
Yeah, no,
actually you're not
yeah.
separating it.
You
So
know, I mean, that's the thing about Boccioni. Boccioni would try
right.
to draw sound and smell. I mean, it's just like, I mean, I think even though he had horrible stuff and like everything, and I don't know whether you should mention him, you know, because of his background, you know, what he was interested in, but you started to think, oh my God, this person was trying to actually visually express, not through painting, through shifting from painting to plaster to sculpture. I mean, it's a big shift for somebody who's becoming famous for painting duration, let's say, to actually then try to incorporate all those same things like light, motion, everything into a sculpture. I mean, there's something bizarrely heroic about that, you know. And then going off the next day to fight in the First World War. I mean, unbelievably strange things where the whole atomistic world started to really,
Right.
you know, the disintegration of things through this incredible technologized war, the breaking down things to dust. I mean, Lucretius would have been, oh my God, this is just come true. This is my predictions.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an interesting thing in terms of how scientists have to trust artists. And certain scientists are so set in their ways, they're not open to totally different perspectives of understanding. And for example, I talked to Otto Rossler at one time and I said, you know, I can't possibly do the kind of level of math that you're doing and so on. And he said, Bill, don't even worry about that because you're going to come up with a set of ways of approaching things that are your way, you know. And I don't think every scientist thinks that way, but I've been lucky to have collaborations with scientists that are very
Yeah.
open to moving across these worlds in ways that are resonant with each other or in ways that are valuable to each other, even though they're very, very, very different.
Yeah, I think there's a different language, though. You know, I think that artists aren't very well trained in a meta language, you know, because a lot of scientists come up with metaphors that are really lame in my mind, you know. So, you know, like spin, and now they're stuck with spin. They can't not talk about it, and they have to say, well, that's not actually spinning. You know, okay, well, why say it in the first place? Why not just tell people the truth? You know, and you think, why did they come? Why did they hide everything? Because we think we're all dummies and we wouldn't understand because they understand. And yet, there's an article came out in Nature or something last year about how many people in physics disagree with the fundamental principles of physics, and it's massive. And like 78% think there's going to be a new theory soon for everything, you know, and you're going, oh my God, you know, and these are just mathematical things. It's like code, it's like digital. I mean, they're not it. The mathematics of something aren't it. You know what I mean? Like they're great. You know, like when they talk about quantum, they say we got measurable effects. Well, they're probabilistically measurable, but what do you actually know quantum is? Well, we don't. We're not even interested in that question. They're not interested in Schrodinger's cat or anything else that we prattle on about. They're interested in the maths work, so that's it. And so I don't know. I think that if you go, we did some workshops about what's the quintessential things that students need to have to be able to work in the area of art and science. And trust was one of them. Being able to play was another. Failure was another one. You know, people have to learn how to fail, and then they know how to adapt from failure. You know, and that we need to get a meta language. You can't just go up and talk to somebody who's speaking a different language and think you're talking the same language because you're not. So I find that, you know, like I don't know. I've just got problems with the kind of this always being I mean, it's what happened to Bergson. Bergson was the prince of time, right? And he was renowned right across America. In New York, he had thousands of people. And when he did his Creative Evolution publication, it was widely read by women, right? And then 70% of the people that would come to his lectures would be women. And then the men started saying that his theories weren't solid because women understood them. And therefore he was polluting philosophy by producing something that just women could understand. And you go, oh my God,
That's crazy. That's insane.
Well, they had that big debate with Einstein where he got demoted as the Prince of Science, of time, because Einstein became the Prince of Time. And you go, but there's just, I mean, his wife did all the maths. Come on. So I think, yeah, great, but it's just, I'm tired of the quantitative, if you see what I mean.
I do have hope in the new generation, though. There's been enough art and science, maybe 20 years now, of us propagating, teaching it. And I've seen an emergence of wonderful youth who don't separate the two. And I'm really hopeful because I believe that what's happened with this division is totally an anomaly historically. It's just a few hundred years since the industrial age of this reductionism and throwing off art and humanities into another batch. So you have contributed so much to that. I mean, I will bring up the workshop again, because to me, it was just the most beautiful way of explaining how you think and how you can, in a poetic way, get the students really excited. And the class consisted of both art and science, actually mostly science students. I was teaching a honors class. But just talking about one dot of that pencil mark is a graphene, and that graphene, and I just continued, and I thought, that's how science needs to be taught. And then it's art too, and it doesn't even matter whether it's art and science, and we could finally do something great in the world. So I can understand your frustration, but I think you've contributed a lot to break down that separation. I really do.
I think we all have tried in this way. It's just, working with technology is partly a problem. It's like what Boccioni said about Picasso, that he wasn't really dealing with fourth dimensional space because he was just painting things from different angles and putting them on a flat surface. And so he's highly critical of Maret's photographs and so on and so forth, again, in the same way that they weren't really understanding the boundarylessness of us as people, but once you get onto things like spiritual stuff, that's why I call the book Concerning the Quantum in Art, from Kandinsky's Concerning the Spiritual in Art, because I'm just replacing quantum as the kind of, because it's just so relevant, like it is and it's misunderstood, but it's very much about a holistic way of thinking about that. People seem to think about quantum as being over there, from them as humans, but over there, and then they're human. But it's, if you go down in scale, it's part of everybody. This failure to measure something is what you're constructed of, and it's just a weird thing. But rather than think about it as something, oh, quantum, it's over there. It's not, or it's in my phone quantum. Of course, these things are happening, but they're also happening in you. And then how do we express these things? How do we create a gift? I would say that Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabanowitz's Hole in Space was a gift for what we're doing now. But in 1980, so in 1980, it was like, oh my God, they would never imagine it. So it's just a strange work of art that was, free. It was a gift, and but it was projecting a future, of how things how things could be, and sometimes then you could step into it, and I think that that's what Kandinsky did with his first abstract thing. And I talk about whether Kandinsky's first abstract painting in 1910 compared to Niels Bohr's diagram of the atom. Why haven't we got more of Kandinsky's understanding of the atomic world? And every science lab has an atom, graphic atom, floating around their lab somewhere, as being that's what an atom is, when it's nothing like what an atom would look like. Kandinsky's painting is a really good example of what the inside of an atom could be. And it's not that that's what he was painting, but it was part of his whole thinking. The holistic thinking that was saying, how do I express something when I see all these things going on, when we've got clairvoyance and telepathy and all these other things happening at the same time about ether, and I've now gone into abstract. How do I deal with that? And is my next abstract painting a copy of my first abstract painting? So now I'm stuck as an abstract painter because I've done one, but now how do I go on, and how do I work out whether it's good or not? Do I have to go back to a figurative thing where I put houses in it, or you see what I mean? It's not a happy world sometimes for artists to try and get through this massive. I mean, it'd be nice if I didn't have any questions at all, and I was incredibly successful. But it's good to just explore these questions, I think. And you're fantastic, because this art science, the things you've done for years, you've been fantastic at that, and generous. Oh my God, you're so generous with your time and effort.
Thank you.
It is.
So you have some
and
questions.
I want to thank Andrea and Bill and Kurt before I go, because otherwise I'd forget, and then I'd be in absolute despair from forgetting.
I just
my guilt would just flood over me.
Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to give a nod to some people online. Simon Biggs. Hi, Simon. He's commenting on your comment on ethics, saying it's a human construct, and not sure that electrons would have any concern of such matters. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Well, it's just like the panpsychics, and you believe that every atom has a kind of consciousness, and whether you were talking about consciousness as a possibility of being in different sorts, like, does things have different duration? Does things have different consciousness? You could argue the fact that there's a kind of layer of consciousness that we all tap into, which is like what we thought was going to happen with the internet. The internet was going to be a thinking layer around the world, and we could just sort of put a hand up and grab some of it instead of the monster that it's become. But so that's the same for me. That's a kind of similar thing, an analogy. And if an electron was a constituent of the Big Bang, and all electrons in the world are the same, then there isn't a better electron, there isn't a worse electron. So every electron in your body or anything around you is the same electron. So it could just be one electron, because they're all the same. It's just a duplication of the same thing. So then you could start to think, why couldn't that be a form of consciousness? Why couldn't that be the sort of bedrock of consciousness? And whether it's true or not, it's just a nice thing to think that that's the possibility. For an artist to think like that. Like, for me, it's like, what would that mean? How would you express something like that? And I always use the example of my favorite when I was a young man, and I love comics, and I love Stan Lee, and I love Silver Surfer more than Doctor Strange. But in this Doctor Strange one, he's asked to fight I imagine Stan Lee going to his office in New York or wherever it was in Marvel, going down and talking to his designer and saying, Doctor Strange has got to fight eternity today. I want a drawing of eternity by 3. You know what I mean? Like, and there's this artist who draws eternity. It's like, that's insane, isn't it? Sort of thing to think you just plug out eternity and that sort of.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. I go, oh my God, I can't. Eternity, which is strange, but it adopted a kind of human form, which is. But the inwards are all, notions of planets. But I just thought that these strange things and then, for Doctor Strange to have to fight eternity or something, it's so these things are going on in your head because I could read comics whereas I couldn't read books. Too many words in them.
Can you tell everybody about your science fiction books that you do on the sideline? You have these other books that you publish.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I kind of, well, they sort of happen. Like I started off writing this paper about the universe being a constituent of itself, a cause of itself. So a kind of causation thing. And when I started up, then it turned into this science fiction kind of story, because I ran out of that kind of causation thing. And then, so it became a story, and the quantum detective became this other kind of story of somebody who gets, like microwave indoctrinated, and so therefore has some kind of quantum thing happening in their brain, which led me on to thinking that intuition could be a quantum phenomena. And then I wrote these books about how that probability thing would happen for this person, how every decision he could make could see a number of probabilities, and then he would make one based on this quantum thing and becoming quantum machines. And I met this physicist called Fisher, Matthew Fisher, who was working on the idea that he could re-engineer phosphorus as the main element in a quantum brain. So he was actually doing the to try and get back to the sort, which, when you have suffered from depression, you use lithium and so on and so forth, and that's the switch. So he wanted to create this switch for the and so if you could create something like that, then maybe you could create this kind of quantum thing in your head, in other words. And he found that if you had a Posner cluster, that you could have, because it's about stability of the electron, so it's a lot of noise, and it's very hard to work in a wet, moist environment. But he thought in a Posner cluster, then it was enough time for things to happen. Because they happen at femtosecond time, don't they? So it's not like our time. Oh my God, it's nearly 11:28 in the midday here. So it's not our time. It's, if we think of time always on a human-centric thing and think about these things through being human and what we think is normal. But when you get down to that level, like, when it's 10 trillion atoms in that piece of graphite, you're going, how do I even imagine that, at that scale? And yet everyone could have a kind of, I don't really think I answered Simon's question tonight.
But Simon has just appeared.
Yeah, so, oh no, Paul's gone off again.
Constantly present as a cat. Hi, Simon. This really quickly. So
I'm not sure if my audio is working.
It's working.
Yeah, it is, Simon.
It is
I can
working,
see you.
right?
Hi, Simon.
Hi, Paul. Good to see you.
Hey.
Yeah, and everyone.
Yes.
I'll shut up.
No, don't shut up.
No, not at all.
You wanted to talk about Seth. That would argue about the environment. You wrote something about this.
Me?
Yes, you.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I mean, just that, Anil Seth has this argument that, in his view, from a neuroscientific point of view at least, that consciousness appears to be something that's a property of living things, of life, which is an interesting proposition. I don't know if I agree with him, but I mean, the main problem is, as he says, the big problem is consciousness. What is it? We don't even really know, and so to even discuss what it might be a property of is problematic. It's nevertheless, it's worth, just like Paul says, he's asking questions. He doesn't know if, the answers are even going to address, his primary concerns, but it's still worth asking those questions. And I think that's also where artists are different to scientists, in that artists actually, I don't think are that concerned with answers to questions. They're more interested in the possibilities that questions open up, the openness that can occur, and the further questions that are made, rather than trying to nail a problem. But that said, I mean, my dad was a scientist, and he was always very keen on the idea that he was less concerned with answers and more with problems. And it was curiosity that was the most important thing.
Yeah, no,
Curiosity.
curiosity is, yeah, I think so. Yeah, anyway, this comes from a paper by a woman called Maria Strom, who's a nano person who's just asking that about the Big Bang and trying to do a mathematical equation, which always struck me as being really bizarre. So it's not something I agree with or disagree with, but it's also something that Max Planck said in 1913 in the thing that about consciousness and matter. It's a constituent of matter and stuff. And once you see these things, you go, oh my God, so like how do I experience that? How do I start to turn that into like, because once you pollute somebody with some information, then you can't necessarily take it away, because it's there. So it's like that sort of thing becomes a part of you. And then when you express yourself, that's part of the expression. It's like it's the sum total. It's there. It's not what you're expressing necessarily about, but that affects you. Like Cézanne saying that when he painted, he was painting atoms dancing in the void. It's like, what does that mean? I mean, did he really say that? Did he not? I mean, it's whether he did or didn't, it's still interesting in him being the sort of beginning of abstraction, which he gets credited with. It's true or not, I don't. But that type of thing, he was curious and he was thinking, he was assembling these things together, these ideas together. And that's what I like. I'm interested in problem finding, I think, which is what you're saying, rather than solutions. I don't think the artwork's a solution. I think it's a step in a direction to try and comprehend, for me, let's say, a liminal space between the classical world and the quantum world. And maybe there is no liminal space. Maybe it's a pliable membrane, but something's got to happen. I mean, how does it know when it's going to be? It's like the role of the observer, like science always talks about the role of the observer. I'm not even sure if the observer can see in a science thing. I mean, does the observer have to go to art school to get training to start making a scientific experiment? I mean, I don't know. I mean, just a guy like, he's only got one eye. I mean, he doesn't see in bifocal thing. So is there any special consideration to be the observer? Because it's like a seminal role.
So Bennett Martin said something that I actually was going to say. So you took the words out of my mouth. The definition of the artist and scientist, it's like there's so many different kinds of artists and 5 million different types of sciences. And to make that kind of binary division, just
I was looking for that.
Reaffirms that separation that's artificial to start with. Anyway, I'll let Bennett say something to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, if I may, actually, coincidentally, here I am with my Vincent van Gogh, who he himself was a very seminal artist in inspiring this, exactly what we're talking about, artists intuitively capturing what the scientists are using to describe with numbers and figures. And the problem that we fall within is sitting within this binary logic of artists do this and scientists do that. When we look back further, like Leonardo da Vinci, for example, where's the division between theologists, between artists, between inventor, scientists? And he still, to this day, is regarded as one of the most prominent artists, genius figures in history. And so it's a dangerous logic that I think is a new invention of colonial modernity that chooses to separate between this and that categories. And like what we were, I'm sorry, like what was just said about the observer.
No.
That's a
Nice one.
very interesting moment. We're all observing the frozen moment in time.
Yeah. It's a good, but it's a tricky point, you know, like, see, that's why I tried to say, when I was trying to describe an artist, I thought I need to put something before the word artist. So I thought a serious artist. And then I thought, it sounds like it's really boring, you know.
Well, I mean,
and then,
honestly, to me, the real magic happens when it's in between, where you can't even define it, what it
oh,
is.
absolutely. But to some extent, if you wanted to write about, Victoria Vesna was an artist that made stuff, you know, then it doesn't say that, it doesn't have any kind of thing of separating you out as somebody who's continue experimenting.
Yeah.
So trying to make it a radical experimental artist was just trying to say, I'm just trying to separate out of this, you know, whole thing, especially when you put S on the end and the arts. I mean, people start to talk to you about the arts and you're going, you know, I don't know what you're talking, which art are we talking about? In talking about the arts in general, it's not really talking about.
Right.
So I think this, you know, I think artists should use anything. I think that now a palette, palette for the artists can have, you know, technology on it and everything else. The artist chooses the palette now. And sorry, you did a perfect moment.
I am so sorry that I got disconnected there.
No, because you said the role of the observer, and then you froze like you were observing us. Yeah, it's a genius moment.
What we were saying, Paul was talking about the observer, and this is exactly, I think, where the future is leading us to, is recognizing that perspective plays a role in the emergence of reality, in how it is perceived and experienced. And it's not helpful to fall into this ideological trap of collapsing our worldview to one truth, when in reality, the possibilities of a myriad unfoldings lie with the openness in not collapsing, not deciding, not falling into a predetermined category, but rather challenging the structures of fixity. And so that's where I bring, this is all wonderful. I love talking about consciousness, but at the end of the day, why is it important? It is important in how we structure our reality so that humans and the environment and technology can live in harmony towards a better future. That's what's the most important. I couldn't give a rat's tail if my AI could think or not. But if it can help me solve the world's problems, if it could help us come up with regenerative solutions to hunger and war and resource exploitation and depletion, that is where the artists and the scientists need to shake hands together and open the doors to the future. Because if we're not doing that, then we're not doing anything important at all.
Yeah, you have to realize that. I think go on, Kurt.
As much as I agree with the whole perspective, it's really truly, I think artists have a wider perspective by definition, and I think that what makes Paul's work so excellent and a really wonderful example. like a wide interest in what makes the world tick and how the world, because there's really like pretty much a million questions, and very few final, if any, answers. So I do not believe, though, that the art has to fix anything, or I mean, or scientists. I think there's nothing to fix really. Like the responsibility to put the responsibility on artists to fix the ails of the world, I think is I don't know, it's nonsensical to me, and misleading, because it's exactly the non to have not a clear defined function what makes art so interesting and important, versus like these very narrow, like focuses of most disciplines, particularly in science, right, where everything is ever broken down more into tiny little slivers of research and focus. So yeah, for me, it's like that's what I love about Paul and his work, that it's like seems, and I
Thanks.
think what Victoria said in the beginning, like this kind of eclectic mind and this eclectic perspective, right? That for me is really truly what defines an artist in essence.
If I thanks, Kurt. That's very nice. But I want to. Can I jump in on that? Like what you're saying, because what Bennett said was about. Is it Bennett Martin or Martin Bennett?
Yes. Yeah. It's Bennett. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, perspective is a sector. People mistake perspective as a thing, as being, but it's just a sector of reality. It's not reality. And you have the ability to put AI on your palette along with everything else. You don't have to privilege it amongst other things. So there's no hierarchy here. And I've been writing the thing about trying to look at things from, I don't like using the word perspective, but it has other meanings, but from this notion of quantum care, that how do we incorporate care into practice as a constituent of practice, not make art about care, but make sure that it's part of the way that we explore things, rather than taking it into other categories. And I think that
Paul,
when you look
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to
go.
say that
You're going.
you sent me you sent me the paper that you were drafting on care, and I absolutely wanted to bring that up during this session. I didn't, not necessarily in the introduction, but definitely in closing. So it's perfect timing for you to bring it up, and also for Bennett to bring all of this up. And this idea of care, particularly now in this time, and community for that matter, which we're showing here right at this moment from different time zones. It's just so critical. It's really not about identifying this or that, or aligning ourselves with this or that person. It's really about individual care, community, thinking small on atomic level, and going out into space with it. And just really, I commend you on that work. I think you should really put it out there and teach it and spread it. And it's a big wonderful thing to say, really, and to think about. And it seems like so frivolous, but it's actually really important that we care.
It's
totally agree.
Go on, Ben.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's at the fundamental level, you see, and I think that what quantum does is it enables us as artists not to just work in the technology, but to think of things from a different viewpoint, and I think it's that viewpoint that's going to be gives us an interesting thing that we've never thought of, looking at it from the infinitely small upwards, like a bit like a Max Ernst primal painting, where he's looking at the world as a sort of, as though he's his ancestral memories, that type of thing, and you're looking at the world as though this was a new thing that's come into being. Yeah.
So Andrea, do you have some last statements, Andrea, Kurt, Bill, before we close?
Just to say thank you. This has been incredibly thought-provoking, and also to just add my thoughts on collaboration from my experience with scientists, and as someone who's scientifically and creatively trained, I think it's a folly to try to have the same question. I think that we can collaborate in ways that have shared processes, shared inquiry, without trying to solve the same problem. And I, for one, definitely resist trying to be fit into a problem-solving mold.
Mm-hmm. Because we tend to use the same methods that created the problem to solve it.
Critique it, right? Yeah, that's possibly more important.
And Bill, do you want to say something before we take off?
Nice to see and listen to everybody. And Paul, it's always wonderful to talk. So thank you so much for such beautiful work.
It's wonderful to see you, Bill. Bill and I were doing PhD together with Roy Ascott.
Yeah. Years ago. Yeah.
Back in the day.
Back in the day, we were next to each other, pounding away whales. So it's lovely to see you, Bill.
Nice to see you. Nice to see many of you that I haven't seen in a long time.
It's really wonderful to see the community. And nice to see you too, Kurt. Do you
Likewise, was wonderful. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so
no, it's great. It's great.
Give me your hand. I want to see your hand.
You got.
And Ivana, where are you? Let's see you, Ivana.
I have to find her, right?
Hi. And
I'll just disappear into the background or something. Like this sort of slide away.
And Sam, are you here?
Yeah. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Kurt. You're fantastic respondents.
Okay. Simon and Andrea, I'm going to look up that paper also.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Nice to see you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Bye-bye.